Everybody now, it's time to gather and bring this to a close. We can see the housing is the biggest topic here. Break it up, you guys. So, draw this.
What is it?
No, they're not going to stop.
Good for you. Happy birthday. Get to go out to dinner. Good? Oh, okay. He was there. You know you come to a lot of these
But these guys
I didn't. Richard had it up, I think. He said it was on one. I did not. Can't do it all. Well, you can have lots of
Pause this again. We'll come back. Well, actually, David's coming back now.
difficult. It's always a problem.
Okay, Dave?
Wow. Oh, dear. Good. Back now.
Okay, we're now going to have our wrap-up. So, I'd like to ask everyone to be quiet so we don't have to speak into the microphone unless we want to, unless we're hoarse.
We're an aging population, David. We're all half deaf.
Yes.
Use the microphone.
Okay, so I'd like to give the opportunity for each of the subcommittees to give a brief overview of some of the ideas that were gathered. And then we may have some questions and answers, and then that's it. So, Steve?
Thank you. Well, I think it went rather well. I was community resources, and some of the topics that we hit were getting young people to volunteer quickly, and not quickly, I'm sorry, getting young people to volunteer at a younger age, not wait until they're adults to volunteer. So sort of, foster young volunteerism. Establish some sort of center, some sort of database where if you have a little bit to give, you can publish that so people know that you are available for a little bit. So you don't have to make that full commitment. Some of the other things we talked about were, we went a little off topic, high-speed internet, but volunteer fair. One of the other things we spoke of was a bartering currency, which is sort of, would be a little unique to Cornwall. It would only be available in Cornwall for Cornwallians, so maybe foster some community, if you could barter with just your neighbors on our own special currency. Another great one was announcements. There's so many committees in the town, and everyone's got some little agenda that they're promoting or that they're fostering. There's an event coming up, and I don't know what's coming up. You don't know what's coming up. But if maybe before every town meeting, the chairman of that committee would just briefly read off some of the up-and-coming events that are coming up, in the near future. So we're all sort of aware of it, at least the people that are on these boards, which I thought was a good one. It helps just promote and get that word out. Everyone's got great ideas, but how do we share them with each other? How do we get them out? And that was, I thought, a very good one. Just a quick announcement. It doesn't have to be explained, but this way, if it catches your ear, you'll know it's coming up, and then you'll attend it, or you'll send an email or whatever, give some advice on it. I want to keep it short, so that's sort of our topic and what we discussed. Anna?
There were so many ideas, I had a headache. But there were some themes, and I will say that I have 10 volunteers to be permanently on this Economic Development Subcommittee. Some of the themes were that there were leftovers from the last town plan that haven't been accomplished yet, and I think that's probably true all the time. One of them was a septic system for West Cornwall. Another one, if I can remember correctly, I don't. But the two groups who came agreed that one of the top priorities has to be high-speed internet in town, and I suspect almost every group talked about it. There was also general consensus that we need to make the zoning regs easier for people to negotiate so that starting businesses in town aren't so difficult. And there was some discussion about the very restricted nature of our limited commercial zones in town. There was some talk about the need for a bar/restaurant for young people to socialize, and there were fond memories of the smoking, what was that called? That chicken barbecue restaurant that we had at one time. Yeah, right. And there was also some discussion about how we might get together and collaborate more. And through collaboration, for example, find common space for young startups to share resources so they don't have to make such big investments. And other types of collaboration to create a pool of fiscal incentives to bring businesses to town here. Perhaps property tax rebates, perhaps grants, if money could be found. There was a discussion of that. So there was a lot of excitement. Everyone agreed that we need economic development. And so now we're going to get to work and see what's possible.
Well, the septic system loomed very large for the Housing Committee, as you can imagine. We talked about high-speed internet also. It was proposed that we have a fund for down payments so that people with limited resources could actually buy houses and then pay the down payment back over the course of time. Something, let's see, this one I'm going to have to read because otherwise I'll get it wrong. It's the entrepreneurial live-work building. So in other words, a building that was purpose-built for people who are going to have a business downstairs and an apartment upstairs, or a business with a living situation next to it. It was suggested that we have a fund for people who would like to put in composting toilets.
I know who suggested that
To get engineering so that they would conform with the state regulations for putting in a regular toilet, actually. I mean, because that's what you have to have in the state of Connecticut. You have to have approval for a regular bathroom in order to put in a composting toilet. But this would be a fund designed especially for people who wanted to put in a composting toilet. And I would add to that we ought to have a fund for people who want to put in solar to run their houses, the same kind of fund for people who want to do something environmentally correct. Tax incentives for selling a house at a reasonable price so that young families could buy a house at a reasonable price that owners aren't selling because they paid huge sums for it and now it's not worth that, but they're holding on to it hoping to get that kind of money. So a lot of creative, interesting ideas. Someone suggested that we bring back the incentive housing zone program. The fact that we didn't get one last time had to do as much with the site as it had to do with anything else, and we shouldn't rule it out as a way of bringing affordable housing to Cornwall.
Hi, I'm Ben Gray. I was heading the Attracting and Retaining Youth Subcommittee. It was really interesting. The two groups that we had interacting were actually quite different in their comments, and I thought that was fascinating. Everybody comes with their own takes. So some of the interesting things, really it was the general consensus that this is a complex issue and it touches on all the housing, it touches on economic development, it touches on our community resources. But there was some specific ideas. There was a general sense of how do we communicate to young people and just new people to town in general that they're welcome to this town. There was a sentiment that maybe people didn't necessarily feel welcomed in the community. So how, do we have some kind of maybe welcoming committee? And then there was talk about maybe some kind of like outreach program to attract young people, maybe families from more local regions than previous outreach programs before that have looked to places like New Haven and Brooklyn. Instead, look to places maybe like Waterbury and Hartford or even Torrington, where people might be more comfortable already with being from the state of Connecticut and looking in Cornwall. There was interest in trying to define the things about Cornwall that young people find attractive, as well as the things that the young people that no longer live here, what was it that kind of turned them off? What made them not consider, because the city of Cornwall was not where they'd like to settle. So trying to come up with these kind of things that Cornwall is great at, and maybe some things that Cornwall needs to work on. So talking to more younger people, I think, was a general idea. There was talk about the desperate need for activities, community activities, whether it's having a local bar. People talked about how important that is for young people. Or even such things as like a gathering place, gathering events, coffee house type things at the church or wherever. We talked about how the bridge dance used to be really popular back in the day, and that was something that really brought people to the town of Cornwall from other places. There was a talk of need to attract youth to the EMT and firefighting services, and one of the creative suggestions for how to do that was to maybe have housing at a kind of subsidized rate for members of these services, or even a house maybe owned for the benefit of those that are willing to participate in these town services. There was talk about a communication gap in the way young and old people communicate, and the need to kind of refine the way, maybe not just using the Cornwall Chronicle, but how do we reach out to people, email, texting, whatever. I'm not sure there was a general consensus reached here, but you know, it's the idea that we need to have more communication. I heard also, yes. Sorry, that was I think a general list of what we accomplished and talked about. Thank you very much.
So I was of Natural Resources. At the end of this evening, it does help to have a mic. And it was also interesting to the contrast between the 2 half hours. I think a constant topic that was brought up by a number of people is asking the question, how, if it's possible to get any data on how important is the preservation of natural resources from an economic standpoint. Is there any way to quantify how much of our economy at the moment is pretty dependent on the quality of our natural resources? That was a question, and the obvious thought is it would be helpful if that could be quantified, and so that there wasn't this, if it could be quantified and it turns out it's a pretty significant amount of our economic health is tied up in the health of our environment, then maybe this thought that it's one or the other, either jobs or the environment, maybe it isn't as simple as that. I think that was the main, there was also people expressing the idea that, sneaking in the other topics that, regulations, it would be real nice if the commercial zone wasn't so small, if people had an easier time starting businesses elsewhere in Cornwall. I think all these topics, and that's about it on the natural resources. All these topics, I think, do overlap. Karen asked us at our last meeting, she said, what category is agriculture in? Is it in the category of economic development? Is it in the category of community resources? Is it natural resources? Is it housing? Because there's no housing, who can work on the farms? So, there's a lot of obviously a lot of overlap in all these groups. Someone just asked me if there is going to be a list, a document put together which ties together what was brought up here, and I think there certainly ought to be. And this, our poor zoning members who thought they were only having one meeting a month, there's homework now. So I think each of us will have to put together a list of what was brought up, and then it will have to be brought together. We are aiming to have a more active page on the website related to this town plan update, where documents such as that will be easily found. So if that hasn't happened yet, but that is a goal of ours. I'd like to ask if there are any questions at this moment. Ben?
How about eventually getting a survey to everybody? You talked a little bit about that. You want to mention that?
Right. So, so that's a good point. At the moment, our thought about surveying people is to wait until we have some specific questions to ask, rather than keeping it broad. So, for instance, if a subcommittee, let's say, for example, the economic development subcommittee comes up with an idea, for example, of allowing increased business use in a residential zone. To spell out that issue a little bit in the form of a survey and ask people their opinion on that, instead of saying, anyway, that's our thought, is to have a survey that would be asked as specific questions come up. And having us have your emails is a very helpful way for us to inform you that there is a survey available, and also we're going to rely on the Chronicle for those announcements in the future.
I just want a little comment on that survey that David's speaking of. I believe Ben is going to spearhead it, but it's going to be a Survey Monkey, and I guess you're all going to get an email regarding it, and it would be great if you could fill it out. It's to help benefit us in the town plan, but it would also be even more beneficial if you could push that message forward and tell your friends and family and neighbors about it, so we get more community involvement through that survey. So that would be appreciated.
Any other questions?
What are the next steps?
Okay, so the next step for planning and zoning is to complete the forming of the subcommittees. So again, if anyone here is interested in serving on a subcommittee, please let us know. There will be an announcement to that effect in the Chronicle. There will be opportunities to have input even if you aren't on a subcommittee. We're going to keep soliciting input. We're going to, after this subcommittees form formally, which I'm hoping will happen at our December meeting, we hope to have, the others haven't heard this, but Gordon encouraged this, and I'm hoping everybody will agree, that every maybe 4 months it'll help to have a gathering that is specifically about what's happening in this process. The subcommittees are where the work occurs, because that's when ideas can get fleshed out, batted around, vetted a bit. So that's, well, hopefully that answers your question. Any other questions? Okay, so I have just a closing remark that, of course, it's a cliche to say that a town's greatest asset are its people, but, you know, and of course that's true in Cornwall. I mean, I think this is an extraordinary town in terms of the how committed the citizenry is, and going back generations or just years. So we're very lucky. I mean, I think we're going to get a better town plan because of that. We also, I mean, I think, speaking, have a vested interest in saying this, but I think we have a very good planning and zoning commission now, as you can see. I mean, and the others who aren't here wanted to be here. They had prior commitments. We had a hard time choosing this date. We also we're lucky to have very good regional planning resources here. The Northwest Hills Council of Governments has become much more active in recent years, and has been a great deal of help to us so far, and will be more help with this update, which I think should be encouraging to all of us. I think, again, we're going to end up with a better town plan because of that. And then I also wanted to, I mean, you're supposed to thank the town government, but it's sincere too that Gordon has played a very active role in the planning here, and has spearheaded a number of meetings to get it going, and I think is very, I think the town generally is very supportive and wants a very good town plan to occur, which isn't the case in all towns. So, you know, all of that's going to help. All of that is the wind at the sails of making a good town plan. Lastly, I just again want to say for the 8th time to give us your emails. And then also there's a couple of, there's an announcement that the Cornwall Conservation Trust tomorrow is having a panel discussion at Mohawk called Saving Forests and Farmland, Meeting the Challenge. It's 3:30 at Mohawk tomorrow. And then the Board of Ed, which has some very challenging work at the moment, has a form there and survey that we're hoping everybody will either fill out before they leave, put it in a basket, or bring home with them and get it to the Board of Ed. I think that's it for announcements. It's not far after 9 o'clock, I think, so thank you all for coming.